Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to be talking about chapters 2 to 4 of The 12 People You Love by Roy Ice. We hope that you were able to check in with us for the first chapter. If not, that's available on our Facebook if you want to go watch that before you watch this one.
Also YouTube.
Also YouTube, because we now have a YouTube channel. And we are in the process of getting all of the wrinkles ironed out, and that we'll have all of that set up ready to go. Having a lot of fun doing this, and we hope that you guys are enjoying it too. Remember in the comments if you have any questions or if you just want to share with us a little bit, you're more than welcome to. And
we'd love your feedback, your reactions to these chapters, the previous chapter. We want this to be a conversation if we can facilitate it. I know we're all kind of new to this kind of format, so hopefully we can get that going. We're joining you today from my food garden. It's under construction. But we're back here because it's fenced off and we have our two new dogs who are rather enthusiastic. So they're out there in the more developed parts of the yard that we should be coming to you from in future installments.
So today we're going to start with chapter 2. So if you do have your books, you can go ahead and turn with us to chapter 2 if you'd like to. Or just listen along.
Nah, bud, close that. Close it, Jay.
And our youngest is trying to come in with the dog.
No, do not let the dogs in, Joshua. Joshua.
All right, so chapter 2.
Go play.
Jesus loved 12.
Go play with the dogs. Sorry about that. Okay, go ahead.
So we're right now in chapter 2. The main point that Elder Ice wants to make is that Jesus loved 12. And I think that this is a really solid point that he makes here. Because all too often I think that we get overwhelmed with the idea of any form of evangelism, let alone friendship evangelism. Sometimes we think that unless we have crowds of 1,000 people, we're not doing it right. Or sometimes if we imagine a crowd bigger than 2, we get anxiety and we freak out about it. But I love the fact that where he starts with it, he goes, look, Jesus preached to crowds of thousands, and Jesus preached to huge masses of people. He sends out 70 people doing door-to-door work, preparing his way, as we talked about in my last sermon. He loved the 120 who gathered in the upper room to pray for God's guidance at Pentecost. But he makes a very good point, is that at the end of the day, though, Jesus chose 12 people who he lived life with, who he did ministry with, who he really poured into and invested and discipled while he was here on earth.
Joshua.
And while Cass talks a little bit more about that, I'm going to get him back in the house.
So my favorite thing about this particular chapter, chapter 2, which I actually really think is kind of the meat, kind of the thesis of the whole book, is the repeated emphasis on love. That Jesus loved, that was his primary function. There's a part in the first chapter that talks about love first and then doctrine and truth will come later. Actually, love is the doctrine and love is the truth. And so that repeated emphasis on love in chapter 2, I really appreciate that. Not just because he says we're called to replicate his teachings with his point of view, but also with that distinct flavor of love. That's at the bottom of page, 10. And that repeated emphasis on love is really important to me, because again, I think love is the doctrine and the truth. It's not apart from it, it's not the vehicle of, it is. It is the foundational truth of our entire faith. God is love. Jesus is that extension of love. Our faith should be love. They will know we are Christians by our love. It's not just part, it's the whole thing. Love is the entirety of our faith, of our religion too, of how we practice this in the world. So I appreciate that repeated emphasis on love, and that's not just part of the point, it is the point. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind throughout this entire thing as we go on. So my favorite part, aside from the love, is on page 16, on the second column in the second paragraph there. He says the disciples were called to share what had convinced them to follow Jesus with another group of unconvinced or partially convinced people. I think this might actually be the thesis of the book. But this, actually, I found this incredibly powerful, personally. So I'm about a decade into what we call deconstructing everything.
But mainly fundamentalism.
Mainly a fundamentalist Christian faith. So that means, for those of us that are doing the work of deconstruction, it's a work of a lifetime. Deconstructing anything. As a feminist, deconstructing patriarchal programming. As a white person, deconstructing the racist structures that we've been raised in and that have been implanted in us. For me, coming from a fundamentalist Christian background, which is the vast majority of all Christian backgrounds, is deconstructing that fundamentalist faith and the damage that's done to me, the damage that's done to the world. And so this right here...
And real quick here, I think that... So before we get too bogged down with it, I think that deconstruction, especially for some of my members, deconstruction I think is an important part of sanctification. This deconstruction I believe is a spirit-led, prayer-led process by which we look at the structures in our lives and we look at the structures within ourselves, and we actually ask some really tough, really important questions. And so as we go along, as Ellen White says, we have many things to learn and many, many things to unlearn. And so as long as we're doing the sanctification thing and we're growing in Christ and we're relying more on Christ and the Spirit is leading us, I think the Spirit is also leading us to deconstruct a lot of the temples, palaces that we've built up in our own minds. Mm-hmm. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
And so I think that, because sometimes I know that word can come off a certain way, but I believe the deconstruction is actually a very important part of the sanctification process.
Thank you, Pastor Adam. I know, guys. I know that I throw these things out there pretty fast, a lot, and I'm glad that.
That's what I'm here for, baby.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
I try not to derail with that, but I want to say that that's powerful for me because I haven't gone through. It's a permanent process of deconstructing, but going through deconstruction of my faith, of my religion, I stayed, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Usually the hurt is too deep. There's too much damage. It comes from the church. It comes with the face of the church.
Especially the clergy.
The clergy. But I stayed. And so what convinced me is really important to me because that has to be the crux of my evangelism, my personal evangelism. It has to be what made me stay, what makes me a believer. And so, I think we move past this point too fast in this chapter, in the whole book. This is the only time this is mentioned. I think that this is the thesis. This is the whole point of sharing this with the 12 people you love. Because what else are you going to share? You know? But the reason why you're here, why you're a Christian, why you follow Jesus, why you haven't gone to something else or walked away, or if you've been in this faith your whole life, why you've devoted your whole life to this.
As Revelation says, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And so this idea of that each and every one of us has this prophetic call to share our faith, because if our faith is something meaningful to us and something beneficial to us, I think we talked about this a little bit last time, why wouldn't we share it with everyone we love as responsibly and slowly as necessary sometimes?
Yes, absolutely. But it really reminded me of, that's not our cat hissing at the dog, is it?
I don't think so.
Okay. That reminded me of a conversation we've had a lot in our marriage and about our faith. And it goes back to this whole idea that I hear mostly in connection to marriage, actually, but also that I've connected personally to my walk with Jesus and to Jesus's choice to be the Christ for us and to be the Messiah, because it's incredibly important to me that he had the same free will as we do, which was to choose that life and to choose to do those things. But it's a daily choice to be a Christian.
Yeah.
It's a daily choice we talk about in our marriage. It's a daily choice to love each other. Every day we can wake up and choose to be love. And that's one of our main primary messages at Journey, is to be love. But it is. You choose every day. You wake up and you choose if you're going to be annoyed at your spouse or if you're going to love them, right? Sometimes you can do both if you're very good at multitasking. But for me, that daily choice, what makes this my daily choice to follow Jesus, You know, and like I mentioned just a minute ago, it's love. And for me, it has to be love. It can't be anything else.
And I think we talked about that a little bit when you were talking. I think you were referring to page 14 with where he says, love them, that's all, but what about the doctrines? And I'm like, and one of the points in the notes I made in the book, I think Cass might have touched on it while I was corralling a child, yes. Is that love is the doctrine and the only doctrine. And because everything else flows from that. Sabbath, health message, the state of the dead, everything that we have. Yeah. Everything that we have stems from love. And is an outflowing and an outpouring of love. And so it's interesting where I think that he could have gone a step further with it. Like he gets like right here and kind of backs up a little bit, but I would have just bowled right through and said,
does that with a lot of points, I gotta say. Like he outlines them and we draw the conclusions. This is one of the things I talk about with my students all the time, with particularly argumentative writing, which I teach as a second sequence, is don't let me draw my conclusions. I might draw the wrong ones, right? Yeah. And we've drawn a lot of conclusions from this that are not in the text, that we think are, but they're almost.
Right.
Is that right?
I think so. And but what I do say is that there are several things that Elder Rice does incredibly. I think points that are super, super, super important for us to hear. And I think that one of the most powerful lines in this text is, God doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be productive.
I love that.
And it's like, because all too often, I can't tell you how many times members will come to me or people will come to me and go, oh, I want to do this work in the church, but I haven't gotten this sorted out yet. Or I'm not good enough. Or I sin too much. Or, oh, I can't get baptized. I haven't stopped smoking. And I still remember doing a baptism where the person still smelled like cigarette because they had a smoke right before I baptized them. And I think that part of the point is that, and we talked about this last time about our definition of perfection, it's not flawlessness. And Scripture makes no illusion about that. It's that perfection is being suited for a task, and perfection is the idea of maturity and completeness. And so as disciples of Jesus, as he reminds us on this page in Matthew 28, go therefore and make other disciples. He doesn't say get your stuff together first. He doesn't say, become perfect first. He doesn't say, or become flawless first. Stop sinning first. He says go out and make new disciples, just as you are, because you are the important part, not the flawlessness. You are the essential ingredient to this whole thing.
Yeah, and that was my other favorite part there, the being productive.
It's do something.
Yeah.
Even if you don't do it well, even if you try and it doesn't work the way you want it to. I mean, come on, guys. Like at Journey, we've tried a lot of different things, and guess what? A lot of them haven't worked, and some of them were, bombastic failures. I don't need to remind you of what those are. We'll leave that for another day. But what we do is we go back to the drawing board, and we prayerfully and I believe in a spirit-led fashion try again, and we learn from those failures, and maybe not even failures. We learn from those experiences. Maybe it's less about success and failure and more about the experiences that we have as we go along the way.
Well, and always moving towards that goal.
Sanctification is a process. Yes. Not a switch.
Yeah, and that productivity, I think, is one of the most important things that we have in the whole book. But yeah, right there, that moment, being called to interpersonal productivity is one of the ways that he puts it. But doing the work, actually doing the work, whatever that looks like for you, because it's going to look different for everybody, right? But doing that work.
And for most of us, the work isn't staying in the house by ourselves and reading enough Spirit of Prophecy that we understand everything and we know all the secrets. It's not about going on the street corner and yelling at people or holding up signs in their faces at conventions. I think the point is, the productivity is, who are we loving in our lives? And how are we loving them? Right? So I really like the points he makes here, especially on page 16. Yeah,
and to go with that was that same thing that we mentioned a little bit last time, getting away from that fear of our own salvation, too. So I come from a Pentecostal background. I went through several non-denominational churches growing up, and then where I spent the majority of my young life until young adulthood was in a Pentecostal evangelical church.
First Assemblies, which is Pentecostal, like right here.
Adam used to call it Holy Roller Light.
Pentecostal Light.
Pentecostal Light. Right?
All the Spirit, half the rolling.
Right. So I come
Sorry,
from.
Pastor Fred.
I come from a tradition, a worship experience. It's very different from most of Adventism. But one of the biggest differences that I've noticed is the Pentecostals are never afraid of their own salvation.
Yeah.
They're not. You do the thing, you do the baptism in the Holy Spirit and
the sinner's prayer.
You do that and then you're done. You're good. And they are solid in that no matter what else comes.
Boldness on the day of judgment,
yes.
I think, is definitely.
And you don't see that as much in Adventism.
Right.
And I think that Gnosticism that creeps into us has something to do with that. That fear that we're not good enough, that we're not there, that we're going to do something to jeopardize our own salvation. And he's trying to get us past that.
Because for Adventism, a lot of times, we're more a faith of the head than a faith of the heart. And there needs to be a balance between the two. And
so my favorite things about Adventism is that you don't have a soul, you are a soul. I love
that holism.
love that. And that we can do that with our whole selves, because that's one of my favorite verses in the Bible too. Yeah, is love with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your might. Mm-hmm. It's the whole thing. The whole thing is involved. And I think that would be that's so important to move past that spirit of fear for our own salvation and to move into that space.
And perhaps if our members could really take, I don't want to necessarily say ownership of, but kind of their salvation, and saying, this is something that Christ has given me, and it's mine because Christ, not because of anything I've done, not because of any sort of hoops that I've jumped through or checklists that I've crossed,
right.
But because of what Christ has done for me. And they start there, I think that a lot of this would be a lot easier. Where it's like, and now, okay, I'm saved. I want other people in my life to have this same experience of salvation. So how does that happen? Mm-hmm. Instead of, am I okay? Am I okay? I mean, we talked about this in many sermons growing up, how I was constantly scared if I didn't ask for forgiveness for every single sin, was I going to make it?
One of my earlier churches was like that.
And I think that part of the problem is that we don't trust Jesus enough. That we don't trust that Jesus saved us. That his salvation is so sure and so thorough that it can account for some of these things. And so, without spending too much time on this, but if you want to talk more about this, I am willing to spend all the time on this.
All the time.
This is one of the most important things, but don't worry about your salvation. Think about the people you love.
Good. I thought those were really the main points in chapter 2. And 2, 3, and 4, I think, really are kind of a package. Once you get through all 3 of those together, they make more sense kind of as a whole together. That's why we're going to do all 3 of those right now. Because that then brings us to your 12, filling out the 12 people that you love, that you want to cultivate these deeper relationships with.
Now, real quick, go ahead and turn to pages 22 and 23 in your book. And if you do not have it, please let me know, and I'll try to get you a copy. So let me know in the comments, or email us at journeysda@gmail.com. And then let me know, and we can try to get you a copy so that you can keep along with us as well. But yeah, so these are the 12.
Well, I was curious, Pastor Adam, how you approached this list yourself, like how you did this, because I suggest, considering it prayerfully. One of the things is let the Holy Spirit bring faces and names into your mind, if that's how she happens to work with you personally, and just like he suggests, writing kind of down the first names that come to your mind, which is one of the ways that I really approached it. How did you approach this?
I would say that the best way to go about this is to sit there and I think prayerfully think about it, right? And because honestly, you have people in your life already that you want in the 12, And you could say, oh, well, that's just me and my desires and stuff, but I believe that the Holy Spirit works with that. And if those people are on your heart, and those are the first names that leap to your mind when you... So, for example, I go, okay, 3 family members that I'm closest to, that I spend the most time with, that I feel needs to feel the love of God the most. One example, and sorry, sister, for throwing you under the bus, is my youngest sister, Christy. Is one that I think about a lot, is one that, well, before this, I spent a lot of time with. And so that would be one example where, you know, she's always on my mind and always on my heart because we're incredibly close. And so you might have family members like that. You don't necessarily have to go, which one of my family members is the biggest mess? Don't do that,
No,
maybe.
please don't. And that was one of the things that I thought about doing this is I don't think that you should think of first, okay, who needs salvation? Who needs a healthy dose of Bible? I don't think that's at all what we're doing here.
Because remember, one of the points that, you might have made this earlier, babe, while I was corralling children, is that one of the most important points that Elder Rice makes on page 14, people are not projects. When we go into this, our mindset has to be, it's incredibly important that we're not going into this saying, okay, who's the biggest train wreck? And how am I going to fix them? First off, you're not the one that's fixing.
Right.
First off, if people are broken, Jesus is the one that fixes. And if people are not where they're supposed to be, Jesus is the one who seeks and saves the lost. You are part of the process, but you are not the process. And people are not projects. So that's why I would say it's really important that you don't just go, okay, who do I think are the biggest? Who do I think are the farthest from Jesus? And for whatever reason you might have, and honestly, because you don't know their insides of their heads, they might be closer to Jesus than you think. Even if they don't like think like you or love like you or act like you, they might actually be closer to Jesus than you think. So be careful when you do that. So what I would say is just, I think that he gives some really good helpful hints in the text. So if you are open to the pages, look at the helpful hints, because I think that really gives you a good place to really start and think about what names. And honestly, all too often in our lives, and I think Blink was the book where they talked about this, whereas the idea of sometimes our gut instincts or our first thoughts are actually pretty dead on. So sometimes, and maybe the Spirit actually works with us in this, and sometimes our instincts are sometimes that first thing that leaps to us when we're not really thinking about it. Is something that we're actually deep down thinking about. So for example, so if you ask yourself your questions, don't like load it, don't rig it, but when you're reading these questions, what are the first names that pop into your head?
Yeah, so for me, I chose our children. That was immediately the first thing that I wrote down, was Ben and JJ.
I mean, incredibly important.
Yeah, you know, who am I closest to? Who do I spend the most time with? But then also, I mean, since I've stepped into the role with doing children's ministry, I've taken a more direct role in their spiritual growth. And so for me, that immediately was what leapt to mind with those two. So, and I knew that was the right choice.
Yeah. Then with your closest friends, again, like when you're hanging out, like, who are the first people you want to call or text? Who are the people that you're closest with? The people that you can really talk to, can really be open with, people that you really have a good rapport with?
Yeah. I mean, I put down the people that I want to text when I pick up my phone. Who am I thinking of? And so I put down those people, my actual closest friends.
Perhaps who are the people that you've texted the most?
Yeah. So I did. I put down my actual closest friends. And I happen to know where all of them are in their faith walks. So for me, this is also, like, this one I liked because one of the suggestions is who's willing to grow their spirituality in accountable ways with you. That this might be a more mutual one. Okay. You know, so for me, my closest friends, I do talk to half of them, I would say, about spiritual things, and the other half I don't. And that made me think about that. Why do I not talk about two of my very dear friends? Because I actually have 4 in my 3 closest friends.
look, this is not an exact thing, okay? So
Now, technically, two of them are unchurched, so I could just move one over to my empty unchurched list.
you could move them to the unchurched
Yes,
list.
yeah, because I have an empty unchurched list. But we'll talk about that. We're getting to that.
But yeah, and so, sorry, I just lost my train of thought on that. Oh, yes. Spirituality. Okay, so one of the important things is people can be spiritual even if they're not religious. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so with the whole who's willing to grow their spirituality in accountable ways with you, they don't have to be Seventh-day Adventists. In fact, they don't even have to be Christian for this to count. Mm-hmm. Because spirituality is a much bigger category than just our little neck of the woods. Yeah? And so people who are willing to grow spiritual with you are perhaps people who are at the very least receptive to spiritual conversations. And like I like how you were saying, well, there are some people that I do talk about spiritual things with. Oh, that's the point I really want to make. There are some people that I don't talk about spiritual things with, and what I have found in my experience is the people that I often talk the least about with spiritual things are often those in my life that are the most spiritual. That sometimes that happens where sometimes even when I'm hanging with my colleagues, like a lot of times we'll talk about spiritual stuff, but there's some times where we just don't.
Yeah.
Or there's sometimes where I have friends that are very churched, and we don't actually talk about church that much. Perhaps because we have that common ground, or because it's like a base assumption for both of us. Sometimes those conversations just don't come up. So I don't know if that's the same with you, or if it's the people you don't talk to about it, or people that are less spiritual, or...
Well, I mean, given our difference in our social spheres, it probably is different. I think that's really interesting. That makes sense, though. Like, that with your colleagues and stuff, you guys are probably talking about other things because your job is spirituality.
We do. Thinking about it, though, we do talk about spiritual things quite a bit because not only is it part of the work package, but it's something we actually are really interested in and care about.
Yeah.
But I would say that sometimes it's less of the day-to-day spiritual things, and oftentimes it's like kind of the more abstract theological conversations, and
not like that spiritual check-in, because that's how I took it.
Yeah, or it's like, how's your ministry doing, or what's going on in your ministry? Oh, can we give you advice about what's going on in your ministry? Yeah, and a little less of the, how's your spiritual walk?
Yeah, how are you? You know, do you want to pray together?
Yeah.
Do you want to, like...
How often do you read the Bible?
Yeah.
Not for work.
Yeah. Yeah. All those uncomfortable questions that church people occasionally ask, and then you're like... Giraffe face. As our brother-in-law would say, right? And so our next category is 3 people in your local church. And so I liked this one too. Like, who are your church friends?
Who are the people that you're closest to at church? The people that when you show up on Sabbath, who are you the most excited to see? And yes, we can do the whole I'm excited to see everybody and we're all a family. And that, I get that. And I'm excited to see everyone too. But you know what? There are some people where you're like, oh man, like if they're there, you're like, yeah, they're here. And when they're not there, you're like, oh man, like you're still glad you're there, but they seem to make the experience just that much better for being there.
Yeah. And you all may have noticed that I'm not the extrovert that Pastor Adam is.
A lot of pastors aren't either, which I don't understand. But.
So for me, it's a little different forming those relationships, and it's taken me all these years to start to form some of those close bonds with people, and to find those people, that I really want that deeper connection with, and that I now seek out, conversation and stuff with. So that was a good experience for me, actually, prayerfully going through that particular one, and just who I've started to build those relationships with. So that was a good experience for me.
I found this one actually to be the hardest because part of my thing, my gig, my calling, is for all of you to be my 3 people, right? And so I sat down and I'm like, well, I can't choose 3, and it's like not only that I can't, but I don't want to, because that's one of the things I love the most about this, and especially through things like this, I can do it for all of you.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's one of the places where this is going to be different for you, because this is a call for us, for those of us that don't have a ministry.
Absolutely.
Right. This is going to become our ministry.
This is a lay ministry for sure. Yeah.
That's what this is, and so it's not really applicable for you in all the situations.
So that's right. I didn't pick 3, so no fighting over who's the favorites
Yeah,
or anything
exactly.
like that. I'm
Yeah.
purposely not choosing 3 for that reason.
Yeah. And I won't say my list just in case somebody's like, oh, I bet I'm on it. So yes, we'll just.
Probably best.
And then the last one, the 3 people who are unchurched, which he spends a good part of chapter 4 talking about. So this is one of the places that my rhetoric came back in that made me question who his audience is here. Because for me, I would say half or more than half of the people in my life are unchurched. And if you add in my students, then it skyrockets.
Exponentially, yeah.
Yes. So for me, a millennial, and anybody with any kind of connection to millennials and Gen Z,
Yeah. With me, it's a little different being clergy, that a lot of people in my life are church because
Right.
that's my main sphere. But with Cass dealing, a lot of her sphere is not church, which I find, and I think that hers is more the norm with Zennials, Millennials,
and Gen Z, as they're hitting adulthood. So Gen Z are the currently the youngest generation that are hitting adulthood. So my current college students and younger are Gen Z. They're 70% unchurched.
Mm-hmm.
It's astronomical. It's the highest we've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, that plays out at La Sierra University where I work.
I mean, was it over half the student population is not
Yeah.
Adventist at this point? Yeah.
I mean, most of them, even if they have a faith base, are unchurched, no matter what religion they're coming from.
Yeah, true. And a lot of our Adventist students are unchurched as well.
Mm-hmm.
They just oftentimes will mark Adventist for, well, I don't blame them for the scholarships or for just because that's what they
Yeah, they're
come from.
culturally.
They're culturally
they're
Adventist.
culturally Adventist. But then this one also, I think we have to be, if your sphere is largely churched people, then this is the one you kind of have to be, I think, the most careful with.
And very intentional.
And very intentional because this is where I found some, as I said, I'm deconstructing fundamentalism in my faith walk. So those words that are fundamentalist ping my radar real hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where some of the fundamentalist rhetoric in this book.
Eternal trajectories.
Eternal trajectories. Being one of them. Pings. So people aren't projects. Elder Ice points out more than once.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing we have to think of. Because in a later chapter, he's like, essentially, take your neighbor a banana bread and, bring them to church. He doesn't say it like that. That's absolutely not what he's saying. But it feels like that with some of the rhetoric. And that's not what we're doing.
Right.
We're loving people to love them. We're not loving them to convert them.
Yeah. Because remember, as we said earlier, conversion happens through the work of the Spirit and Jesus Christ. Now, they can see Jesus in you, and they can have an encounter with Jesus
Mm-hmm.
through you. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I always want to tell people, it's like, don't force it. Don't force it. I found in my life the conversations come. Like when, for example, right now, the conversations are coming. Because one of the things I've learned is that when you have close friends and they know you're a believer, they'll come to you in moments like this and they'll say, and not in a mocking way, not in a spiteful way, but they'll say, where is God in this? And I've heard that so many times recently. And this is where you have the opportunity to really be Christ there and to really show love there. But those conversations can't be forced. They cannot be forced. And so I like with this helpful hint, actually just the first part. What friends do you have from work, hobbies, clubs, organizations, your neighborhood, etc.? It might be your neighbor. I know that for one of my members, one of his friends is one of his neighbors, and I think at one point they went on walks together. But like the idea of like the people near you. Now, unfortunately, I know with a lot of this, and especially right now with the social distancing, some of this might be hard. So we want to caveat with, we understand that our first and foremost priority as responsible citizens, as responsible Christians, is to essentially stay at home.
Yeah.
To social distancing and to help flatten the curve. And so we understand that some of this might not be possible to, like that how, might not be possible
Right now.
the way we want to right now. So start small, start slow. Because guess what? There's a lot of us have the time
Right now.
to do it. So start with the names and just start with the names, and that's it. And then we'll talk more about how, and we'll make notes for how, and we'll plan ahead for when we get the all clear. But in the meanwhile, what I love how he starts it is he starts with this idea of pray for them. Just you pick the names. I don't even think the whole point is to tell them. I don't think you should tell them, hey, you're on my list. Because that can have some really weird connotations.
Yeah, I like that. I think he says later, you don't show up on a first date with your wedding vows.
Yeah.
Because they'd run the other way. Like, that's not, they're like, nope, that escalated quickly.
Yeah. So we start by praying for them. And we just say, you know what, God, be with them, be what they're going through. Be in their hearts, make them receptive to our relationship. I mean, I think that all of those things.
That's chapter 5.
Sorry, I'm skipping ahead a little bit.
It's all right, because we'll have plenty to talk about with that. With 4, I just wanted to hit a couple of the main points in 4, our very short chapter. It's very helpful. About filling that list out. So this really helps too. I found that reading all the way through 4 and then going back to the actual names was the most helpful way to do it.
The overlap thing will help you with your list thing where you put 2 names in
one
thing.
Yeah, like, pop the other one over,
But because overlap is okay.
Yeah,
too,
the overlap's okay. Yes, so the overlap is absolutely okay. Having fewer than 12 names is absolutely okay. And I like here where he's talking about if you don't have any friends who are unchurched, join a group that matches your passions. And I loved that. I thought that was really great. Join a charity.
A charity, or for example, because you guys know I'm a huge geek. On Facebook, one of my pastor friends invited me to a board game group on Facebook where people exchange shelfies, where they take pictures of their game shelves, and it's really positive, really a really great group. A lot of them, most of them, probably unchurched, and so it's really cool that I have this opportunity to be part of this thing, where I can interact with people and talk with people, and it's very clear from looking at my stuff that you can see that I'm a pastor. And that I'm tied in with a faith tradition. And so, and sometimes through my Twitter life, and sometimes through some of my interactions with people in the gaming world, you could say, I've had opportunities to share my faith. And that's really cool when you get... So part of it is put yourself out there. And join groups.
Volunteer at your local animal shelter. They're always looking for volunteers, literally to cuddle puppies and kittens.
Yeah. I mean, really, they just want you to come in and play
with puppies and kittens. I mean, absolutely. Go do that. Amazing.
Responsibly, social distancing,
right.
and all the
right
things.
Now. Yeah.
Right.
But I love that idea that we should be active in our community outside of our church life, and that's where we will find people.
Because remember, we're not just a Christian in the church, and we're not just an Adventist in the church. We're an Adventist in our homes. We're an Adventist in the voting booths. We're an Adventist at the supermarket. We're an Adventist in our cars, which I sometimes need to remember. We're Adventists everywhere we go, and we're Christians everywhere we go. And so don't be afraid of entering into some of these spaces, especially digitally, because they're not Christian. You are.
Yeah.
And Christ goes with you wherever you go. And so Christ will be there with you, with them. And
we don't mean in that, and I'm pretty sure people would know this from us and from the way that our Christian culture has been evolving. We don't mean in that old-fashioned bust down the door, yelling that people are sinners, holding the Holy Bible overhead kind of way.
Throwing Bibles out as you bust in the door.
Right. We mean
sinner,
in that you just be yourself.
Yeah. And
you love. And that's how it is.
I think it's important. That's why I think it's important if it's something you has a hobby anyways. Some of you might like to write, or some of you might like to do art, or some of you might like to do outdoorsy stuff, or you like sports ball. Other people like sports ball too, and there's all sorts of sports ball groups that support all the sports ball teams.
And I mean, it goes back to one of my most treasured kind of Christian memories was at Chapman when I was struggling with my faith all the way through college and everything. But I had one fellow writer, I was in the creative writing program, who was a militant atheist, just absolutely militant atheist. And he and I became casual friends. And over the 4 years, we spent a lot of time in class together, and occasionally grabbed a coffee after. We weren't close friends or anything, but then our final year, I was helping him with a final project, and after that, as we were saying goodbye for actually what would be the last time, I didn't know it at the time, but the last time I ever saw him, he knew I was a Christian. I wasn't very loud about it, because again, I was really struggling with my faith at the time.
I mean, a lot of college students, that's a typical thing.
But he said to me, he's packing up his camera equipment, and he said to me, he's like, hey, so, like, you're pretty chill for a Christian. He's like, if more Christians were like you, like, I wouldn't be the way I am about Christians. And,
wow.
Yeah. Like, that, that's one of the most
so cool.
meaningful memories I have, because I wasn't trying to convert him. I wasn't trying to convert anybody at that point in my life. I really wasn't sure what I was believing or who I was going to be or anything like that. And that was so profound to me, that just loving him as a friend made that difference. That he then had something else to connect to Christ, because we're Christ in the world.
Perhaps with a bunch of serious negative interactions he had with Christians.
Yes. He wrote about them frequently. They were very negative.
And he finally found a positive one. And sometimes that can make all the difference. Like, you never know where life will take people. And again, Jesus can take a little, and with a little do a lot. 5 loaves and 5 fish, and he can feed 5,000s, right? With just one positive experience, Christ can build a relationship. And so I think that's really powerful. Yeah. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, thank you. Well, do you have anything else from our selected chapters to go over before we...
I think we hit a lot of the main points. Start thinking about the 12. Don't be a creeper about it, and don't, like I said, be careful. People are people, not projects. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we can all do this. I think that's one thing I want to stress.
Yeah.
No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter where you think you are in your walk, no matter if you've read the Bible 5 days in a row the last week, or you haven't read the Bible in 5 months, no matter where you are, or years, no matter where you are, you could start this now. And that's why that's like the thing I love most about this, is how really simple this is to start.
Yeah, because going back to that main point, what makes you a Christian? That's what you have to share. That's it.
What's your story? So maybe that's one of the first things to think about. Mm-hmm. What's your story? And then also, who are the people that are most important to me? And start there. And then fill it out as we go along. You don't have to get all 12 names right away. You can take... Honestly, we've got time. You can take all the time you need.
Yeah, and as Elder says in chapter 4, your list will probably change over time too.
Yeah, maybe you try one. I think in my sermon this last Sabbath, sometimes you find receptivity to a relationship. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you want a deeper relationship and the other person doesn't.
Yeah. Sometimes
that's okay
those seasons end. We move. Mm-hmm. I mean, life changes, especially. At our stage in life, your relationships fluctuate.
And the intensity and the type and the number of relationships you have, especially when you have kids, changes a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And so that's okay. And I think that's part of the point, is because all of this, pun intended, all of this is a journey that we're on together. And all of this is a journey that we're on with Christ. And journeys don't stay the same through the whole thing. They change. And sometimes we get curveballs thrown at us, like a pandemic. Sometimes
that's a curveball.
And quite a curveball. But we roll with it, because Jesus has given us the tools to do that. And Jesus loves us, and Jesus inspires us to love. And so we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And these 12 people are going to be okay. And so I think that's what I want to leave them with, is think about what you and Jesus, and think about how you guys got together, your story, and then think about the people in your lives and who you want to love on more, to be honest.
You want to close us in prayer?
Yeah, that sounds great.
And then we get to go get some dinner.
That sounds great.
All right.
Father in heaven, Lord, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for this opportunity Lord, thank you for this chance to discuss this really important concept. Please be with each and every person that's hearing this and seeing this. Be with each and every person that is doing this with us. And may we all find those 12 people that we want to love more. May we all reconnect with you in remembering our stories on how we got together with you. And Lord, just bless this. Bless this, our efforts, bless our prayers, bless the people that we love, so that we build these stronger relationships with you at the center. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I pray. Amen.